Thank you, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the board is a hybrid physical virtual meeting. I would like to welcome those in the boardroom with me today. And if you would, while you keep your microphone muted, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Meeting is called to order. This morning, we're going to move a little bit away from our agenda. And before I really proceed, I'm going to acknowledge Board Member Vince Logan, who will retire from federal service at the end of this month. And I'm going to ask the board secretary to include some prepared remarks to be included in the minutes. Vince was appointed by the board to the board by President Biden on October 3rd, 2022, and was named chairman a few weeks later. During his time leading FCA, Vince has brought a unique perspective to the board and to our agency. With his background as a lawyer and investment advisor, he was keenly aware of the critical importance of the safety and soundness of the farm credit system. A key focus of his tenure has been innovation. Emphasizing the importance of responsible innovation, he understood emerging risk in our financial system and stressed the importance of mitigating those risks to maintain safety and soundness. I want to take this opportunity to thank him personally for his collaboration, his leadership, and lasting contributions to FCA. And now I'm going to turn it over to Board Member Smith for a few comments.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. Well, Vince, I'd like to start out for thanking you for your support in getting the YBS rule across the finish line. It's been a little over a year ago, and something that all of FCA and the board is very proud of and appreciate that. Also appreciate your passion for advancing the veteran and Native American communities. My guess when you first came to FCA, it'd be like me learning finances. It'd be like you learning on agriculture. And I would hope your time at FCA learning about agriculture helps you to contribute to those efforts in the past, which I'm sure you'll continue. Best of success in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Logan.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Hall and Board Member Smith. Good morning, everyone. Morning. It's with sadness that this will be my final board meeting. And as my time at FCA draws to a close, I would like to take a moment to reflect on our incredible accomplishments during my tenure over the past few years. Now, it's been both an honor and a privilege to serve on the FCA board, and then, of course, as a chairman during that time. The opportunity to work alongside such talented, dedicated individuals here at FCA is something I will always cherish. Upon my arrival, I was met with a truly warm welcome and was immediately struck by everyone's genuine friendliness here. That became even more apparent as I embarked on my initial priority, which was having meeting and hearing from the staff here at FCA. And over the course of my first year, as many of you all remember, I had the pleasure of sitting down for lunch with the various teams here in McLean. I think we had 17 lunches here. Then I went out and I had a chance to visit and have lunch with the folks in Bloomington, Dallas, Denver, and Sacramento during my first year. So these conversations that I had taught me so much about, the work we do here, how we support one another, and the values that drive us here at FCA. The insights I gained from those discussions shaped my leadership and guided my decisions throughout my tenure here. For that, I want to thank everyone and took the time to welcome me, to come up to me, to shake my hand, introduce themselves, and to share their perspectives. I think by now you are all familiar with my personal story. My experiences, my personal life were the foundation of my commitment to service of our country and to making sure that underrepresented communities feel seen, heard, and supported within FCA and the farm credit system. has played a pivotal role in shaping our priorities, ensuring the safety and soundness of the FCS, fostering responsible innovation, ensuring service to all eligible creditworthy borrowers, and continually striving to be among the best places to work in the federal government. Together, we issued a final rule on the system service to young, beginning, and small farmers and ranchers. We rolled out a new methodology for collecting data on these producers to show where there may be opportunities for additional service. We advanced the agency's efforts to foster increased innovation and efficiency. We enhanced our outreach to veterans and hosted several meaningful events acknowledging their service and sacrifice. We held tribal listening sessions and honored the ancestral homelands of each of our field offices. And we raised the pride flag at FCA to show our support for the LGBTQ plus community as an example of how everyone belongs. These efforts have strengthened our connection to underserved communities and to foster a more inclusive and respectful environment here at FCA. I'm deeply grateful to everyone who contributed to making those initiatives a success. Of course, while fostering a supportive workplace is essential, we also focused on refining the processes that guided our work. What began as a conversation in the hallway turned into opportunities to refine our operations and evolved into a transformative new approaches. This resulted in increased collaboration across the agency and the removal of siloed approaches to our operational issues, and enhancing the formalizing our agency's annual budget process, prioritizing strategic technology investments, and accentuating our commitment to our greatest asset here at FCA, our people. We work tirelessly to engage the system participants and internally within FCA to foster greater collaboration and partnership amongst our board, our executive assistants, and our agency leadership, helping us plan to be more effective in the future, especially in the world of rapid change and emerging technologies. This changing world is why our senior leadership began strategizing for what I was calling Workforce 2033, ensuring that we identify and build our skills and capabilities needed to meet the challenges for the next 100 years, while continuing to provide farmers, ranchers, and rural Americans with access to safe, reliable, and affordable credit. In addition to the various trips to meet and engage the system, we also hit the road and travel around the country to destinations including Silicon Valley, New York, Nevada, Nebraska, Boston, to explore the applications and potential of emerging technologies, including AI in financial services. We saw firsthand how quickly the financial landscape is changing and the speed at which financial institutions, including the system's competitors, are evolving. These visits laid the groundwork for our Innovation Symposium, where industry leaders joined us to explore trends in impacting both future finance and agriculture, discussing emerging risks and identify ways we can leverage innovation to fulfill our public mission. I'm so proud of our agency's combined efforts that allowed the FCA board to adopt our innovation philosophy statement and our final rule on cyber risk management, efforts that will enhance system security and continue to foster innovation and growth for years to come. So, as I said, it's a sad day. And as we reflect on the work we've done here over the last 2 years, I'm incredibly humbled by what we accomplished together and as what I saw. It is truly noteworthy. Above all, it's very respectful, innovative, and collaborative culture here at FCA, and I admire it. And I've worked a lot of places, and I can tell you that this is a wonderful place to work, as I think we all feel that. It's the culture that makes FCA one of the best places to work in the federal government, and I'm confident it will continue to drive this agency's success for years to come. I want to express my appreciation to Chairman Hall and to Board Member Smith for their support and partnership. and to thank you to every member of the FCA staff for your hard work, your dedication, and your unwavering commitment to our mission. It's been a true honor to serve on the FCA board, and I look forward to seeing all the great things that this agency will accomplish in the future. I turn it back to Chairman Hall. Thank you.
Now I'll ask the secretary to the board to address a few technical and protocol items.
We have a quorum. The full board is present for this meeting. Chairman Hall, Board Member Smith, and Board Member Logan. Please ensure that you have silenced any mobile devices you have with you. The virtual portion of this hybrid meeting is on Cisco WebEx. We have 2 OIT staff, Ben Rana and Victor Amaya, monitoring and managing the meeting. They will be locking this meeting and no new connections will be allowed. OIT will be advancing the slides, so you will hear presenters say, "Next slide." If you printed any of the closed session materials, please ensure that you properly dispose of these materials after the meeting. If you lose connectivity in this meeting, please contact Victor Amaya. Lastly, this meeting is being recorded. The video recording of the open portion of this meeting will be posted for public viewing for a limited period of time. Chairman Hall, that concludes the technical and protocol items. We're ready to continue when you are.
Secretary will now read an opening statement on the government and the Sunshine Act.
This is an open Farm Credit Administration Board meeting under the Government and the Sunshine Act. If anyone raises a subject that may be discussed in closed session as permitted by the Government and the Sunshine Act, Chairman Hall will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
We will now review the published agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as published?
Mr. Chairman, I move to adopt the agenda as published.
I second the motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? If not, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Logan?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. Next, we will consider whether any portions of the meeting should be closed to the public.
Mr. Chairman, the agenda does include items that we should properly discuss in closed session. I move that we close the meeting at that point.
And I second that motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, the secretary will record the vote on this motion.
Mr. Logan?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes as presented behind tab 1.
I move to approve the minutes for the February 13th, 2025 regular board meeting as presented.
I second the motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Logan?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. At this time, I'll ask Rebecca Kaiser of ODAE and Patrick Fairchild of OE to present the report on avian flu. This will be an information item. Patrick?
All right. Well, good morning, Chairman Hall, Board Member Smith, Board Member Logan. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about the highly pathogenic avian influenza, or also known as bird flu. I am Patrick Fairchild. I'm the Credit Program Manager for the Office of Examination. And joining me today, who will be following me, is Rebecca Kaiser from the Office of Data Analytics and Economics. Next slide, please. So what we plan to cover today is really a high-level overview of the timeline of events. How do we get here where we're at today with the avian influenza or avian flu? Next, we'll cover the farm credit system industry concentrations with a particular focus on the primary industries that are most impacted by avian flu. Then we'll get into current conditions for the poultry and dairy sectors and share a lot of information for both of those industries and the current trends. Then Rebecca will follow up with the economic conditions and impacts being caused by avian influenza and follow up and end with identification, mitigation, financial support that is going on right now as we try to battle avian influenza. Next slide, please. So timeline of events of how do we get here? We did back up all the way to 2014, 2015. That was really the first case of bird flu. That resulted in 232 cases and about 50 million birds were impacted by that outbreak. It was a short-lived outbreak, about 8 months from start to finish. Then we fast forward to 2020. There really wasn't a whole lot of cases of avian influenza. 2020, there was confirmed cases in turkey barns, primarily in North and South Carolina. Those were the first reported cases. And then in 2021, there was limited additional cases in U.S. commercial poultry operations, but we continued to see more and more positive cases with migratory birds, which was a leading indicator of potential stress to come. In 2022, there were various confirmed cases of avian influenza in several poultry farms throughout the country, most notably in Iowa with some of the first impacts. And then there was also the first human infection reported in the U.S. in the state of Colorado in April of 2022. And then in 2023, we somewhat saw a little bit of a lull in the number of new cases. But then 2024, especially the last quarter of 2024, year to date through February of 2025, the cases have spiked, and we've seen a significant increase in the number of bird cases throughout the country. Next slide, please. So a quick overview on the Farm Credit System exposures. This information, excuse me, is as of December 31st of 2024. And again, avian influenza is primarily impacting the poultry and the dairy sectors. And so I did highlight the concentration, the system volume concentration to these two industries, with dairy representing approximately 5.7% of total system volume, or about $24.5 billion. And this is book volume outstanding. And poultry and eggs were grouped together, represent about 2.4% of total system volume, or about $10.3 billion outstanding. Next slide, please. So as we talked about in the timeline and some of the cases that we've been seeing, this bar chart is meant to really put that into perspective. You can see in 2022, there was a significant increase in the number of cases, almost 60 million birds. And then in 2023, as we talked about, there really was a lull in the number of new cases being reported. However, in 2024, you can see that significant increase to almost 50 million birds impacted in 2024. And through the first 2 months of 2025, you can see that significant increase in the number of cases, over 30 million birds impacted just in the last 2 months of 2025. And we also wanted to put in perspective that, again, a lot of the increase or the number of cases in 2024 happened in that last quarter of 2024, specifically November and December. And so if you actually move to November and December statistics over onto that 2025 bar chart, it would be a straight line up increase in those number of cases over the last 3 years. And so we wanted to point that out, that there is a significant increase in the number of cases. And the biggest concern with poultry is mortality. They have a very high mortality rate, 90 to 100% mortality once a bird is infected with avian flu. And based on the CDC USDA monitoring, which is where we received a lot of this information, through February 28th of 2025, there's been a total of 166 million birds impacted since the initial outbreak in 2022. Next slide, please. This pie chart is really meant to show and demonstrate where the significant impact has been seen within the poultry sector. And as you can see here, again, this is since the outbreak in 2022 through February of 2025, the egg layer industry has taken the significant impact here. They represent 78.2% of all cases reported and the number of birds that are culled. And so the layer industry is where particular focus is being paid attention to. Broilers, on the other hand, still, they've been impacted, but to a less degree, representing about 11%, a little over 11% of the total cases. The turkey industry has been impacted as well, about 8.4% of the total cases. And all other, which would be your backyard, flocks, ducks, and other fowl, represented about 2.2% of the total cases. Next slide, please. So this chart, the data comes again from the CDC and USDA monitoring. And what this demonstrates is the number of cases and the number of impacted birds by county. Dark blue indicates that there is a significant number of birds that were impacted by avian flu and cold. And you can see a lot of that activity is in the Midwest, particularly in Iowa, Ohio, Minnesota, but then also in California. And again, if we back up, Iowa, Ohio, and California represent about 48% of total cases. And again, on the pie chart before, the egg layer industry was the most impacted. And so Iowa and Ohio are the number 1 and number 3 egg producing states in the country. So it's not necessarily a surprise that that's where a number of these cases have been reported. Next slide, please. So we'll move into dairy and the impact on the dairy sector. As I mentioned earlier, the primary impact for poultry is mortality. The primary impact on the dairy industry is really the reduced milk production. And milk production, typically when a cow is infected with avian influenza, can see milk production declines between 15 and 25%. What is interesting is that typically less than 10% of an infected herd may even show symptoms. And sick cows, usually once they're quarantined, will recover in 10 to 21 days. So mortality rates are very low, typically less than 2%. But one of the concerns with avian influenza is certainly the impact of secondary infections, because the avian influenza does have a significant impact on a cow. As they're battling that illness, they can be subject to other illnesses that can have a detrimental impact. The other issue is that there's still unknown regarding the permanent production, if it will ever return to what their production was prior to being infected with avian influenza, and also reproduction issues, their ability to again get pregnant and then go back into the milking rotation. And so we do typically see higher cull rates within dairies that are impacted by avian influenza, but it's not necessarily mortality that's causing the cow reduction. One thing I did want to point out too is that according to CDC, USDA, and FDA, all agree that pasteurized dairy products, milk, cheese, etc., with even viral remnants of avian influenza, are still safe for human consumption. And Rebecca will get into a bit on the demand side, and we really haven't seen a lot of decrease at all in the demand side for dairy products. And then last, avian influenza cases in humans, there's been about 70 cases reported year to date. And a lot of those, about 60%, have been tied to dairy, primarily dairy workers. And part of that, is because of the daily interaction between the human and the animal, which is slightly different than egg layers and the poultry sector. A number of the other cases have come from the poultry sector and farm workers there, but a lot of those farm workers were directly involved in the culling and exposure to the birds. So next slide, please. And last, before I turn it over to Rebecca, this chart again is from the USDA, but avian influenza has been confirmed in 17 states, and this is all through February 28th of 2025. The first reported case was in Texas in March of 2024. Since March, 977 confirmed cases, and 77% of all those cases were in the state of California. So the dark blue indicates the state with the most cases. I do want to point out that the level of granularity in the reporting does differ from the poultry compared to the dairy sector. The dairy reporting is only based on by case and by state, not at the county level. And we also don't know the number of animals that are impacted on the dairy side versus the poultry side reports the exact number of birds that were culled. With that, I will turn it over to Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Good morning. I'm just going to jump right into things, starting off with the broiler markets and how we're seeing HPAI infecting both supply and demand of these markets. So since January 1st, we've seen about 3 million or about 2.8 million broilers lost to HPAI. Those birds were depopulated. Put into perspective, we produce usually over 9 billion broilers each year. 2024, we produced 9.4 billion. So this is a decrease of less than 0.1% of total U.S. broiler production. Not saying that these supply shocks aren't going to continue to happen or can't happen. It's just not what we're seeing compared to egg layers. The risk for HPAI for the broiler markets mostly lies on the demand side of things, and not so much as domestic demand, but foreign demand. Since 2012, domestic demand for chicken has been rising. People love their chicken. It's a great source of protein. It's also usually a little bit more inexpensive compared to other proteins such as pork and especially beef right now. With that, we could be seeing increased domestic demand for chicken, along with substitution effects away from beef in the next couple years. On the other side, foreign demand and exports. You can take a look at this graph. Usually about 14% of U.S. broilers are exported out of the country. This makes up a significant portion of the broiler market. And you can see in 2015 on this graph, the sharp decline in broiler exports due to HPAI outbreak in that year. That year, broiler exports dropped about 8%. And you can see in 2022, there was less of a decline. And the reasoning for this was that our trade partners put fewer national and statewide bans on U.S. broilers. Instead, they were doing more regionalized bans, either at the county level or in specific zones, which allowed producers outside of areas that have been affected to then continue to ship their broilers to our trade partners. The big worry for this is that there's a lot of unknown and uncertainty with whether exports will be able to continue if HPAI continues its current outbreak at its current rate. One of the things that USDA has really talked about has been vaccination attempts, especially for egg layers. And the broiler industry doesn't like those attempts, doesn't like any talk of that, with the threat that it could shut down U.S. broiler exports. With broiler exports making up 14% of their demand in their market, that is a significant threat if those markets get shut down. If that comes to fruition, if that happens, we could see some downward pressure on prices as that chunk of demand is essentially just taken away. Still, though, chicken prices are forecasted to be slightly up this year, continuing on trends for the past 3 years, mostly hedged on that domestic demand as well as export demand. Next slide, please. The egg markets are the ones that have really been in the news lately, taking the biggest impacts. Like Patrick said, about 78% of all birds that have been impacted by HPAI have been egg layers. Since January 1st, that number is over 31 million birds. January 1st inventory of egg layers was 304 million. So if you do quick math on that, that's about 10% decline, which is a significant supply shock there. Looking back to 2015 and 2022, there on the graph in the top line, that dark gray line, you can see the decreases in layer inventory from those outbreaks in 2015, 2022. In 2015, that decrease was a little over 30 million birds in a 2-month span. In 2022, it was a little over 22 million birds in a 2-month span. So right now, about 31 million birds in 2025 now. That puts us about at the same level it was decline in 2015. You can see in 2015, we were able to build back up that laying flock fairly quickly, same with 2022. The question right now is how long is this outbreak going to last? Right now, egg prices and the scale of egg price increases really depends on how big these shocks are, as well as the elasticity of demand. So people really like their eggs. There's not a whole lot of substitutes for eggs. So as prices increase, people don't adjust their behavior as much until prices maybe get too high for them and they start to adjust their actions. In January, table egg prices nationally topped $6.50, with some states having higher prices. I know back in Colorado, prices are over $10 a dozen, and I've heard California and other areas, it's $1 an egg, about $12 a dozen. With this, USDA has announced a plan or plans to try and help alleviate some of the supply shocks by importing more eggs from other countries. It was announced, I think Turkey, the country of Turkey, is planning to send about 35 million dozen eggs to the U.S. this year. In 2015, the U.S. was able to amp up our imports of table eggs to help supplement the domestic supply in that year. That year, we imported almost 4 times as many eggs as we normally would. That allowed the laying flock to kind of recuperate, helped with some of the high prices for consumers. So we may see some of that going into this year as well. At this point, consumers are trying their best to cope with it, high egg prices. We've seen restaurants adding surcharges of 50 cents, $1 per egg, popular breakfast chains. And we've also seen stores rationing eggs where, you can only buy 1 dozen or 2 dozen a day. If they don't ration them, people tend to wait out the door in the morning before the stores even open up in the morning just to be able to get their eggs for the day or the week. We've also seen instances of increased illegal egg smuggling across the Mexican border. So people are really affected by these egg prices, and I think that's pretty evident, especially in the news that you read and all these actions that people are trying to take to cope with these prices. Next slide, please. Now getting into the dairy side of things and the impact of HPAI on dairy markets. 977 cases, as Patrick said, from March 2024 to the end of February 2025. So we're about a year into seeing cases in dairy cattle. In the fourth quarter of 2024, 97% of cases were in California. So this graph shows fourth quarter milk production of California. You can see 2024 had a pretty significant decrease in milk production compared to years past. It was down 6.5% from 2023 and down even 8.3% from 2022. Now, at the same time, national milk production over that fourth quarter did not decrease, it actually increased. And this was mostly due to gains in other states. And those gains in milk production are following a long-term trend of genetic advancements in the dairy industry. A lot of that has come from higher demand in butter and cheeses. So producers have been able to genetically select for cows that have higher percentages of butter fat as well as proteins in their milk. I think the big worry right now with dairy and the big risks to the dairy markets are the unknowns that Patrick talked a little bit about. We don't know, because we're only about a year into this, is how long are these impacts going to last? How long will decreased milk production last? We're seeing producers not wait around and cull their calves or their cows a little bit earlier instead of waiting to see if even if they recover from the illness, if it's going to take 6 months to a year to 2 years to totally get back to that baseline milk production before infection. Most of the time, producers aren't going to wait for that. So we see increased culling. We've also seen that 2 new cases in Nevada were identified with a separate strain of HPAI. And so there's some uncertainty about whether or not this different strain is going to affect cows differently, if it will be a higher transmission rate, if it's going to mutate and be able to pass into humans. There's a lot of unknowns. The good thing is that right now milk prices are high, and that has been largely due to the higher demand for those butterfat and proteins. So we've seen high prices in 2024. Still coming down maybe a little bit to start 2025, but at record levels pretty much. With the long-term effects of culling cows from the herds, we also have a small replacement herd of heifers for dairy cattle. What this means is that any producers that do cull their cows, they're not going to be able to rebuild that herd very quickly with the low supply of replacements. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about some of the response and actions that have come out, especially from USDA, but as well as individual producers and states. The biggest 2 for stopping HPAI is identification and prevention. We need to be able to identify the disease, identify infection very quickly to help stop prevention or stop the spread. In December, the USDA implemented the National Milk Testing Strategy, and there's also interstate testing mandates for interstate shipping of dairy cattle. Both of these are aimed at being able to identify any cases in dairy cattle quickly so that we can stop the spread to the herds. Prevention usually focuses on biosecurity matters as well as personal protective equipment or PPE. These things have been in place in the poultry sector since about 2015, or largely since 2015, since that first HPAI outbreak. And it's still an increased, we still want to see increased usage of that to hopefully prevent the spread to other flocks in different areas, particularly preventing the spread into the broiler sector. Financial assistance is available for both prevention and identification, for testing of dairy cows, as well as disposal of milk, disposal of culled birds as well. Indemnity payments from the USDA are available to both poultry and dairy producers. For poultry producers, there was a new rule added in December that the USDA added, just making it mandatory for producers to be eligible for indemnity payments to pass mandatory biosecurity audits. And this comes after about 18% of total indemnity payments to poultry producers from HPAI have gone to facilities with repeat infections. Milk losses are covered under the USDA's ELAP program, which is their supplemental ad hoc payment program for livestock. However, I want to emphasize that though there are indemnity payments and financial assistance for producers, these do not cover all economic costs associated with, lost opportunity cost of lost production, the time it takes to get back up and running, as well as, trying to really just spending more time to figure out how you're going to combat this in the future in your herd or in your flock. I think at this point, we're seeing maybe a decrease in cases in both poultry and dairy. We haven't seen major cases in egg layers in a couple of weeks, which is good news. And I think we're also seeing some relief on the wholesale side of egg prices. Usually retail prices are a little bit sticky, so we may see prices come down in a little while. But I think there is a bright side to this, that we might be at a turning point. Next slide, please. With that, I'm going to invite Patrick back up, and we will answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any questions on the presentation? Board Member Smith?
Yeah, I did, and this will probably be more directed to you, Patrick, on looking at the concentration on layers. I remember yesterday at our briefing, you'd mentioned the layers is concentrated Iowa, Ohio, and I think California is where most of the concentration is. But broilers, southeast part of the United States, the thing that struck me, we're talking about millions. When we talk about layers, we talk about broilers, we're talking about billions. And you said if it was ever to affect the broiler industry, how devastating it could be due to the numbers. So I'm pondering that this morning. I said, why? The difference between layers and broilers. And I know, I'm wondering if you thought the same. A hen, I think a laying hen has a life of 3 to 4 years, whereas a broiler, I don't know, 3 to 4 months, maybe less than 6 months anyway. Is that why we haven't seen the degree of loss, you think, in the broiler industry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. I think that is still the big unknown, is why is it that the broilers have not been impacted near as much as the layer operations? And, originally there was a lot of discussion about different climate, that could have something to do with the outbreaks in Iowa, et cetera. It was always kind of tied to migratory bird patterns. But that doesn't really explain, again, why the broiler sector hasn't been impacted, because a lot of the broiler sector is right in the heart of a flyway as well. So, still a lot of questions around why the broiler industry hasn't been impacted, but it's certainly something we're closely watching, because of that 2.4% concentration to poultry and eggs that I mentioned in the industry concentrations, a vast majority of that is the broiler volume. And so if the broilers are impacted, it would have a much bigger impact on the poultry sector as a whole. So again, I apologize for not having a direct response and knowing why, but it's certainly a question that we all have, and we're all paying close attention.
And apparently it's not a question by the experts have answered either. But,
right.
But yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Board Member Logan?
No questions today, but thank you very much for your presentation.
Rebecca, back on the chart on egg prices, it seemed like, and I think you sort of addressed that at the end, once we sort of get past the cases, it takes what, 12 to 18 months to sort of rebuild production and get egg volume back up to where prices sort of normalize. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think in the past, in 2015, it took, about a year or so. I think this really depends on how many cases we've seen in either the breeders or in pullets, and how quickly we're able to recover from those losses. Thankfully, we haven't seen very many, I think less than 1 million cases in breeders or pullets. So with that, we should be able to, once cases kind of maybe stop or trend down further, be able to recover and recover fairly quickly.
We just need to hope for not back-to-back years of outbreaks.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you both. Good job on your presentation.
Thank you.
Very much. If there are no further questions, I'm going to thank you for your presentation and ask everyone to turn to the closed session tab. I'm going to thank those members of the public for attending this meeting. The next item on our agenda is a topic for closed session. Because this agenda topic is exempt under the Government and Sunshine Act, and the board has voted to do so, I will ask members of the public and the staff who are not attending the closed session, please leave the meeting.